Discord. If you can see me, let me know.
Okay. Do I just check my notifications, or I'll just search you?
Yeah, just search me. Yeah, we're good. We're live, Alan.
Oh, okay, great.
Beautiful. All right, all right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode with the GOAT of nutrition himself, Alan Aragon. This is our third episode. I'm super excited that I managed to get him on here for the third time. Okay, so for those of you who don't know you, who haven't watched our previous episodes, please introduce yourself to the world, Alan.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me back. It is such an honor to be here. And I am, in a nutshell, one of the guys who started the evidence-based movement in the fitness/nutrition industry. So this means I've just been around for a really long time, and my colleagues and I have published a lot of the research upon which the practice guidelines for improving body composition and performance that nutritionists and dietitians, their practice guidelines are based largely on our published research. And so I would like to think that, I've made a dent in the industry in that regard. But as you and I were just talking about, it's an ongoing process trying to get the subsequent generations of people educated, and then having that education trickle out so that the general public can actually become more or better educated and get better results. And so yeah, that's, in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Yeah, I think you're being very modest. Your work is incredible, right? And it's
Thank
incredible,
you.
especially for practitioners like us who are evidence-based. Like if I have a question and I don't have an answer to, I know where I go, right? Like, and I message you all the time, and you're so quick to respond. So as a mentor, thank you so much, right, for everything that you're doing for this industry, because it's needed, especially in the sea of misinformation that is out there. Everybody is a guru right now, Alan, right?
Yes,
And
that's right.
it's really scary because you have a lot of people who are trying to be healthy. Like life is hard as it is, life is stressful, our environments are not helping, right? So you can have someone who's trying to be healthy and juggle their work and the family life and all of these things, and then they go on social media and this guru is saying, hey, if you want to be healthy, you need to cut out sugar, you need to cut out carbs, you need to cut out this, you need to train 7 days a week. And that mom is looking at all those restrictions and she's going, nah, forget it. I'm not going to bother. I'd rather just keep doing what I'm doing, right? Because being healthy seems so much harder. It seems so complicated, but it's really not that hard, right? Because people are not taught the basics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I was sent a reel on Instagram the other day of somebody making the claim that you shouldn't drink ice water. You shouldn't drink cold water because it does this and this and that, and it, constricts, and it this and that, and like the claims were too absurd to remember, really. But I'm thinking, wow, this is a large account, and this post has a bunch of likes, meaning some people actually heard it and thought, okay, I'm going to avoid cold water now.
Yeah.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah.
because there are so many things like that that people get wrapped up in. Like, for example, the order of which they eat their foods in their meal. So they hear that, oh, okay, well, if I eat a meal, I have to eat the vegetables first, and then the protein, and then the starch after that. Otherwise, I'm going to have a big glucose spike.
Yeah.
And in their minds, it makes sense. But to people who actually know the literature and the science of this and the physiology of the fact that the that's normal, like glucose elevations after you have a meal is as normal as heart rate elevations when you're exercising.
Yeah.
And people just are really, they're getting deceived, and they end up fostering this neurotic relationship with food because of so much information, misinformation that's out there. And it's put out by people who deliver it so convincingly because they're so confident about it and they're so passionate about it. And a lot of these people really believe what they're saying. And so therefore,
Mm,
you know, people just get miseducated on a massive scale.
yeah, yeah. And this leads into a nice segue into my first question, actually. The clients who I work with, the amazing women who come into my world, are usually women who've tried everything out there, right? I'm usually the last resort type of coach, right? I've
Yeah.
tried a 13-day diet, I've tried the keto, I've tried carnivore, I've tried all of these things, and it hasn't worked. Help me. Now, that's a good thing, of course, but it can really be challenging for me because now I'm having people with so much unlearning that needs to happen first,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
One of the common things that they come with is this idea of an alkaline diet, right? I need
Mhm.
to eat certain foods to keep my blood pH levels at a certain point. Talk to us about that. Like, how did that start? Is that actually a thing? Do we have any control as our blood pH goes? You know?
Our blood pH is tightly regulated. Otherwise, we just wouldn't survive. We would just die off. And there's a really, really wide range of diets that the body can tolerate in terms of what kind of potential, well, the so-called potential renal acid load that the diets impose on the body.
Hmm.
So there is a scale, the PRAL scale, potential renal acid load scale. However, when you look at functional impacts of differences in the potential acid load of various foods, if you look at functional impacts, and the main functional impact would be possibly the skeleton. So, like, for example, if your body was incapable of buffering acidity,
Mm-hmm.
then the main bodily tissue store it would draw from to counteract acidity with an alkaline substance is the bone tissue.
Yeah.
And so it's been theorized or hypothesized that, oh, well, we can't eat too much protein because protein is made of amino acids, and that'll raise the acidity of the blood, and then the blood will have to counteract it with some alkaline substance, aha, bone. So therefore, you got to keep the protein low. And then there's another a related myth
Mm-hmm.
that says um, yeah, dairy is bad for the bones because
Mm-hmm.
it's rich in certain amino acids, and then your body has to buffer the acidity by leaching calcium from the bones, and none of this is true. None of this is true. The only consistent benefit that you could get from choosing more alkaline foods is the fact that they tend to be foods that we don't eat enough of, like fruits and vegetables.
Yeah. High in fiber,
And
actually.
yep,
Yeah.
high in fiber, low in caloric density, high in micronutrition,
Mm-hmm.
high in nutrients we tend to not get enough of. And so the default benefit of choosing in quotes alkaline foods is really not necessarily their alkalinity, but their water, their fiber content, their polyphenol content, their micronutrient content wrapped in a low energy density package. And they're just more nutritious than a lot of the type of junk that is available out there that people tend to eat. So what people need to do is just let go of this whole acid alkaline idea and think more in terms of nutritious versus not very nutritious. So
Mm.
it's a lot more accurate to think of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you feel amazing, not because somehow you managed to change your blood pH, but actually because you eat better, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly, yes.
Yeah, awesome. So my next question, and this is something that you spoke about in your latest review, and this is
Mhm.
to do with sugar addiction, right? Again, I do get a lot of women who say, "Oh my God, I'm addicted to sugar. When I stop sugar, I just can't. I get this, I feel like I want to faint sometimes, and all of these things." Now, me understanding the physiology behind this is okay. Do you really feel like you're about to faint, or is it just that perception of thinking you're addicted to sugar and somehow is bringing about all of these physiological responses or feelings or fears, because you do have people who are literally scared to cut out sugar out of their lives because they feel like I can't do without this cake 24/7, right? Now my question to you is it actually a thing? Can we be addicted to sugar the way people can be addicted to drugs, let's say? Do you have any evidence?
Um, yeah, it's kind of a complicated answer.
Mm-hmm.
And something I forgot to mention with the previous question was that, um, but it could get a little bit like unnecessarily technical, but when people go for these foods that are alkaline, they're getting better nutrition, but they're also getting more antioxidant nutrients in the diet.
Mm-hmm.
And oxidative stress is one of the many processes that can lead to disease. And so these types of foods, fruits and vegetables, they reduce oxidative stress, but that still has little to nothing to do with acid versus alkaline.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of looking at the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so now onto your question about sugar and addiction.
Mm.
The okay, there needs to be a distinction that we make between addiction and reward. So reward, or so-called food reward, is necessary in order to reinforce our drive to eat. And the reason why that is important is because we have to eat to survive. So there has to be some innate biological wiring within us to want to eat food. And so that is made possible by the so-called reward response. Okay, so the difference between food reward and addiction, to whether it be supposedly to a given food or a given substance, is that addiction is driven by a reward response that is orders of magnitude greater than the reward response that you can derive from food. So with addiction, there typically is a very strong dopamine mediated reward response that is often accompanied by psychoactive alteration with at the brain level, and therefore it's a very different feeling.
Mm.
For example, the difference between being drunk or high versus versus the feeling you get when you're pretty hungry and then you hit that hunger with some cake or some ice cream or some pizza. I mean, they're both rewarding, but one of them, but the response to psychoactive substances uh, is much more powerful than the response to eating a piece of cake. And the difference in response is almost like it's analogous to the difference between a bicycle that's just powered by your own muscle, just powered by muscle locomotion, a bicycle,
Yeah.
versus a high powered motorcycle. So there's a huge functional difference between those two vehicles. And the same principle applies when you're talking about food versus
Mm,
actual drugs.
mm,
And so both activate similar reward pathways. And you can even say they activate the same reward pathway, the dopaminergic reward pathway.
mhm,
But the addictive substances will also be accompanied by withdrawal. So, in other words, when you stop engaging in the substance, you will experience physical discomfort, physical pain, physical symptoms. This is basically not the case, and it's basically not possible to experience these sort of physical withdrawal symptoms with food. The withdrawal symptoms you might experience are the fact that, hey, I'm hungry and I need to eat in order to survive. And so you're going to feel, that peristalsis, that nagging at the
yeah,
stomach, and sort of like the physical, psychological, emotional yearning or longing or craving
mm,
for to eat something.
mm,
However, it is very different than, for example, somebody who can't hold their hand still
yeah,
because they have a degree of physical dependence on
mm,
alcohol. And it's very different from somebody who has been addicted to any number of illicit drugs when they're forced to sort of cease and stop. Another example, like smokers sometimes have some very tangible, measurable physical symptoms if they just stop cold. Um, and so, yeah, there's little to no measurable withdrawal symptoms with food reward. So the complicated answer to the question, if I can sum it up, is
mm,
that yes, similar reward pathways, but we have to distinguish between reward and addiction. And addiction is also accompanied by withdrawal, and addiction is also accompanied by very strong psychoactive effects from the thing that you're addicted to. And then, okay, if I can add a little wrinkle here, some people will say, well, there are behavioral addictions like gambling,
mhm,
like and so why do we have to actually say, why do we have to qualify food addictions with the exact same things that the drug addictions when we can classify gambling as an addiction?
yeah,
Then we have to say, okay, well, then you cannot say that they're the same type of addiction. You cannot say that food addiction is the same type of addiction as gambling addiction or drug addiction. They're very different types of pathological behavioral attachments.
yeah, yeah,
And so we can say it that way because dependence on drugs as a result of being addicted is very different than in quotes dependence on food, because we actually need food and
mm,
need the drugs or the gambling to be healthy. So it's completely different. Um, and then there's a little technicality that needs to be made clear as well. When people say, I'm addicted to sugar,
mm, mm, mm,
they are technically wrong because it's more accurate to say, I am craving a food that will give me immediate reward and maximal caloric density. And the only way you can do that is if you consume a hyper palatable food that's usually highly engineered, that's almost an even combination of sugar and fat.
yeah,
So people who claim to be addicted to sugar are for sure not getting the sugar jar and spooning
definitely,
sugar straight. You
yeah,
know, they're
yeah,
not doing that. They're
yeah,
reaching for sugar fat combination foods that are hyper palatable.
yeah,
And there are problem foods like that. The Yale eating addiction scale, which is
mm,
controversial because it's got You know, it's got controversial terms wrapped into it. At near the top of the scale, you got pastries, you have things like pizza.
Yeah.
You have
I mean, it'd be
I think I
interesting to find someone who's addicted to chicken.
you're right. Chicken breast, right? No. Um, and yeah, the sugar thing, like I've actually I've actually tried this with like with certain food groups, you can
Mm,
actually lift the limit off and have and see success. And it's
mm,
usually the fibrous vegetables or non-starchy vegetables.
yeah,
Have as much salad greens as you
yeah,
want. You
yeah.
like broccoli, you want to eat a bathtub full of broccoli, you
Go
think you
for it.
can?
Yeah,
Go for it, right?
yeah.
I started experimenting with doing that with fresh fruit with
Mm,
clients. Like, oh, you really think you can eat 6 apples in a day? Be my guest.
mm,
They don't and they can't because after 3 apples, you're tapping out. You're like,
yeah,
damn, forget it. This is enough. That's enough.
yeah,
And so um it's not a sugar thing. Apples are almost all sugar.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's a added sugar. It's an engineered food where sugar is isolated and added to the food. It's
yeah,
not about, if it was about sugar per se, then we would have to cut fruits out of the diet. We would have to cut milk out of the diet.
yeah,
And so because heck, milk is mostly sugar by calories. If you're especially if you're looking at the reduced fat types of
yeah,
milks and stuff.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I know I rambled quite a
No,
bit there, but
that this is a really important conversation because what find in my practice is sometimes it's just the language. Sometimes it's, hey, I'm addicted to sugar. It's this identity people put on themselves, right? And they feel like they can't stop because they have this addiction. But once you have a conversation with them and you make them realize, hey, maybe it's just a habit. Because again, with our kids, when they're upset or sad, what do we do? Here's a chocolate, right? Or here's candy, or here's this, or here's that, right? So that habit we grow up with. So when we're adults and we're stressed, we gravitate towards the same foods that we're used to having when we're upset, or when we're happy, or when we're celebrating stuff. So part of that is habit. So when we break this down to clients, they're like, oh my God, I actually have a power. I have a power here to say, no, I'm not going to have this cake. I can say no to it. It takes time to build that ability to challenge that craving. But Alan, once they realize that it's just cake and it's just cookie, it's nothing powerful as they used to make it up in their heads, there's so much empowerment that comes with that, you know?
yes, it's really great. I totally agree. I totally agree. It is a perception thing.
Yeah.
And it is a habit change thing. And just like with habit changes, it's a matter of reinforcing behaviors and thought patterns. And if somebody consistently tells themselves, I'm addicted to sugar, and if they constantly think it, then they will convince themselves and reinforce that reinforce that perception. And so that is part of the problem. If you can have somebody convince themselves of the idea that food addiction is not accurate,
Mm,
it's not necessarily a real thing, and therefore I need to change the way that I think about this particular topic.
yeah.
And then you reinforce that the idea that, okay, it's just food. We need food to survive. And we really shouldn't be giving all this power to a cookie.
Yeah.
A cookie should be something that, yeah, I can take it or leave it.
Yes.
It's not the same thing with alcoholics who are trying to abstain from that bottle of whatever. Those are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And one can even argue, and I've looked at this a little bit, even with alcohol and alcoholics. depending on the severity of the addiction and the dependence, the moderation is still an option on the table, depending. Not everybody has to just wipe it out completely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's even a lesser magnitude there with food.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to completely abstain from cookies, cake, and chocolate and candies and pastries, and that's what makes them happy, okay, fine, great. But you don't have to,
Yeah.
in order to be successful.
And I found that really interesting. I think this is where the whole idea around customizing an approach to the client, right? I have some people where when I say just have it in moderation, they're like, Yusra, do not tell me to have it in moderation, because it's like you're teasing me with this cookie. I'd rather not have it at all. So for these people, not having it at all while they're trying to build new habits and all of these things, it works better. For others, moderation works better. So it really comes down to the individual in front of me. Like, what approach can you sustain in a way that doesn't drive you crazy? Because these changes are not easy to make, right?
I agree completely. And the whole individualizing type of concept is really huge. And I'm glad you brought it up, because people don't realize, like, our main job as practitioners is to be able to individualize the programs. And it even goes as far as these difficult questions about, like, is obesity a disease? Or is obesity a choice? These are questions that don't have a universal answer. For some people, obesity is a disease for various reasons that are measurable. For some people, it isn't. Is obesity a choice? For some people, it was a damn choice. And for other people, no, it wasn't. Maybe they were born into a family that fed them a certain way. And then, but even with that scenario, after a certain point in adulthood and thinking adulthood, you might have a harder time undoing obesity because you've been classically conditioned for so many years. And arguably, your neural circuits have been rewired to a certain degree to facilitate overeating more so than other people.
Yeah.
But you still have a choice in what you're going to do about it. So, so there can be, within the same person, there can be an arc of obesity not being a choice at the beginning to a certain point in their development where, okay, you do have a choice in the matter now. You're a thinking adult, and you can institute countermeasures against obesity. So therefore, it is a choice, and so a choice or not.
Yeah.
So there's complicated and controversial and emotionally charged topics weaved in with this whole food addiction, sugar addiction type of thing, because it's complicated.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, Alan, as well, is as practitioners, as nutritionists, and as personal trainers, not a lot of us are coached on how to deal with the human psychology, right? It's so structured. Hey, you want to be healthy and fit and build muscle, do XYZ. You want to lose weight, do XYZ. Okay, but you're talking to a human with real human experiences, right? With a human who's busy, who may hardly have time, who's stressed, who has all of these things, right? So where does that human experience come into these programs that are created for them? A lot of them, they're not customized to the person. They're so rigid and so strict and almost so mechanical, right? And the person goes, yeah, screw this, it's too hard, right?
Yeah.
So as practitioners, we need to understand and look at the human in front of us, not just the weight, not just the bones, not just the muscles, right? But their actual human experience.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we also have to look at, as a human in front of us, we have to kind of make an assessment of whether they're ready to engage in a program. Because some
Absolutely.
people are not ready to engage in a program. Some people will say, hey, I want these changes. And then you can assess their situation and their circumstances. And, what people don't do enough as practitioners is tell people, hey, you're not ready to
Yeah,
take on a program for
yeah,
many reasons.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
sometimes it can begin with people's sleeping patterns and the nature of their work. And if somebody is underslept, overstressed, and completely distracted, adding a whole new program to their lifestyle sometimes is just not possible at the
Yeah,
present time.
yeah,
They're not at the right place to be able to engage.
absolutely. Now that leads perfectly into my next question. What are your thoughts on chrononutrition? So eating according to our circadian rhythm, right?
Mhm.
Is there any benefit to that outside the eat healthy, don't overeat, exercise, or anything like that? Is there any extra benefit to sleeping according to our body clocks?
There are sort of these functional and mechanical um, things that we need to pay attention to, but
Mm-hmm.
they really have very little to do with how our body clocks handle very specific aspects of nutrition. So the practical and mechanical things that we would need to pay attention to
Mm.
is maybe not having a very large, high fluid volume meal very close to bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason we wouldn't do that is not because the calories are somehow going to get more preferentially stored in the fat tissue, but it's because that it can disturb our sleep because we'll need to go to the bathroom at 3 a.m. And so that disturbance of sleep can have a cascade of negative consequences if you lower your sleep quality. There are many things that poor sleep does negatively to people's health goals and their body composition goals. So that would be one of the things that would relate to time of day and eating.
Mm.
Another thing that would relate to time of day and eating would be respecting proper fueling for the individual's exercise demands. And
Mm-hmm.
so if their exercise is of a certain high endurance nature, high demand nature, and it happens at a particular time of day, then you're going to want to respect proper fueling of whatever point in the day that training bout happens to take place.
Mm.
So there, once again, we don't have these universal rules about when to eat what, um, except for the other one I said about, okay, right before going to bed, you probably don't want to have 3 gallons of water alongside with this huge meal that's a high water meal. Okay. Um, the other the aspects of chrononutrition that are always pushed out that are false are two things really pop out. Number one is you have to have your final meal at a certain time of day, or you have to cut off your intake at a certain early point in the evening or late afternoon. That is just completely false. And it can also lower people's quality of life because you're essentially claiming that you need to skip dinner. So that's bad from a psychological standpoint. It's bad from a social standpoint. Um, and it can also be bad from a physiological standpoint for the elderly population who need to take almost whatever opportunities they can to make sure their protein intake is sufficient to prevent things like sarcopenia and age-related lean mass wasting. And another thing, another chrononutrition rule that a lot of people push out is that not only do we have to stop eating at a certain point in the early evening, but we have to narrow our feeding window to this 8 hours or less. And that the only benefit to doing that is for some people for whom it eliminates the opportunity to overeat. So it sort of forces people into this kind of little box to where their opportunities to overeat are reduced. That is literally the only benefit to that. And the people who have their noses in the research literature a little bit more will see that there is this push for time-restricted eating and limiting it to the earlier part of the day. So early time-restricted feeding, or early time-restricted eating, as they're now calling it.
Yeah.
We used to call it time-restricted feeding. Now it's time-restricted eating because they didn't want to portray humans as cattle or something like that. So, so early time-restricted eating, when you look at studies that last about 12 to 24 hours, there is a superior effect on glycemic control with early time restricted feeding compared to late time restricted feeding or all day feeding. Okay, so we have that bit of literature, but we also have long-term literature by Liu, L-I-U, and colleagues, 12 months, where they compared an eating regime where they ate from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. versus 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So they compared those two and ran the experiment for 12 months. There was a moderate caloric deficit. It wasn't anything wild or unrealistic. And both groups lost body weight and body fat. Both groups improved their cardiometabolic health, well, everything from glucose control to blood lipids to equivalent degrees. So they're just basically there were two different roads that both led to Rome. So the whole idea that we need to eat in a certain window, and not only that, we need to put this window in a specific point of the day, is a bunch of hogwash where you're missing the forest for the trees, and you are, as the saying goes, you're stumbling over dollar bills to pick up pennies.
Yeah.
So yeah, people are really missing the big rocks of health. And not only that, there's even research looking at alternate day fasting versus daily caloric restriction in lean subjects. So this was Templeman and colleagues. I forgot the year, but I know it's Templeman. And their caloric deficit was equivalent by the end of the week. It's just that one group daily caloric restricted and the other group alternate day fasted. The alternate day fasting group lost more lean body mass than the daily caloric restriction group. And that's not necessarily a good thing. So that also tells us, though, that chrononutrition models and intermittent fasting models in general are beneficial until they're not.
Yeah.
In other words, they can be beneficial for the controlling of caloric intake if you need to restrict or control your caloric intake to lose weight or to come to a healthy body composition.
Yeah.
But once you're there can actually be intermittent fasting models like alternate day fasting to lean body mass in people who don't.
Yeah. And I think this things like this, which are so technical, right? For the majority of people who are trying to lose weight, like the starting point, Alan, is usually just eat more vegetables, just move a little bit more, right? They're not ready to start focusing on, eat according to your wake and sleep cycle and all of this. Like, it's too technical, it's too high up in the pyramid. Let's get people down here first. Let's get them to eat more protein first, right? Let's get them to eat more veggies first, and then get a bit more technical with all of these things.
But that's not exciting though.
I
Come
know,
on,
right?
Yusra.
That's not
That's not
magical.
where's the book sales in that? There's a physician out there who's written about chrononutrition and is published on it. His name is Sachin Panda.
Mm-hmm.
And he not only is he telling you to stop eating like whatever it is, 3 hours or something like that before bed, but he's telling you don't eat within the first hour that you wake up. Just wait at least an hour so you can keep your eating window down to this 8 hours max. And you know what? Honestly, I that's a lot of baloney. Okay. That's a lot of bovine scatology.
Yeah.
And I hate to hear it. I hate to hear people buying into that kind of neurotic behavior with food when, just like you said, people need to know that the body is smarter than we give it credit for.
Yeah.
If we want to eat from 12 to 12, we can eat from 12 to 12 if the overall diet is healthy and if our program is allowing us to proceed towards favorable health or maintain favorable health. And by that, I mean proper sleep, proper body composition, proper psychological health,
Yeah.
and then all of the stuff that we already kind of know about what constitutes a healthy diet, although that's getting skewed a lot with
Yeah.
today's
Yeah.
misinformation,
Yeah.
where people are afraid to eat plant foods and stuff, which is really silly. But yeah, if people can just know that in order to, for example, to lose weight, we need to eat fewer calories than we're burning by the end of the day or the end of the week. If
Mm.
you're more of a by the end of the week person, then your program for imposing that deficit might be more non-linear than somebody who is more of a by the end of the day person where they would be engaging in daily caloric
Mm.
restriction.
Mm.
But if people have that overall principle down pat that need to impose and sustain a caloric deficit that's number one realistic and number two that doesn't impose too much suffering or difficulty in terms of the rules you have to follow that makes it unsustainable. And
Mm.
you don't need those rules anyway. I have to say, the whole area of, in quotes, chrononutrition is just really nitpicking at the thin layer of potential icing on the cake or even the sprinkles on the icing compared to things like make sure you're eating enough overall to fuel a physically active
Yeah.
lifestyle and make sure you have an overall healthy food selection.
Mm.
And the other technical little things we can say, like, okay, make sure you're getting enough protein to
Yeah.
maintain lean body mass.
Mm.
Um, Other than that, it's like the chrononutrition thing. It's just a bunch of theory and hypothesis and looking at stuff that barely, if at all, matters.
But that's what we like to kind of stick with, right? That stuff that doesn't matter at all. Those are the ones we hang on to because they seem so magical. Finally, my
Yeah.
weight loss
Yeah.
problems are going to be solved, right?
Yeah. And the lay audience, they get enamored and
Yeah.
captured by buzzwords
Yeah.
like autophagy. And like if they hear a guru say, hey, we need to fast a certain minimum amount of hours per day or per month in order to regenerate
Mm.
our cells and reinvigorate our immunity and prevent cancer and all that. They remember that. They go,
Yeah.
fasting is automatically good.
Yeah.
When okay, fasting can be good in certain respects and for certain reasons, but it's not for the reasons that they think. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Okay. So I've watched, I think, a couple of episodes, a couple of podcast episodes, and on both of them you spoke about this fancy cool thing called collateral fat loss, right? Like, okay, we
That right.
talk about collateral fat loss. Talk to me about that. What is it?
Okay. Okay. So it comes from the term collateral damage.
Mm-hmm.
Collateral damage is, you can think of it as the unwanted casualties of war. So, like, for example, in war, there are civilian casualties, and that's unideal, unwanted, but they're sort of the necessary sacrifices, right, to win the war.
Mm.
So, collateral damage. Collateral fattening is that's where they grab the term from.
Mm.
So, collateral fattening is a phenomenon where when you're losing weight, along with the body fat that you're losing, you're also losing stuff you really shouldn't lose, like muscle tissue. So
Mm.
you're losing lean mass alongside of your fat mass
Mm.
while you're trying to lose weight. And
Mm.
so when you finally hit your goal weight, you're like, yay, I hit my goal weight. But because you lost a bunch of lean body mass, then the body perceives some sort of an energy crisis where it rewires itself to thinking, I have to gain this muscle back as soon as possible. I have to regain this lean mass that we lost, because lean mass is crucial to survival. And so as far as the body is concerned, we are now under a critical survival threat. So what the body will do is it'll ramp up its appetite hormones, its hunger hormones, and it will just increase your biological drive to eat back as much of that weight as possible and as quickly as possible in order to, what the body wants to do, gain back the lean mass. And so this is the phenomenon called collateral fattening, because even though you lost all of that body weight, when you gained it back in the yo-yoing cycle, you
Mm.
actually gain back more body fat than you started off with.
Oh, wow.
And that's because you were much hungrier than you really should have been at the end of the dieting cycle. So the solution to that is to, when you're losing weight, you have to do your best to maintain lean body mass. And if I may throw a little technicality in here, there are some people with so much excess body fat at the start that it's fine to lose a certain amount of lean mass,
Mm.
because fat mass itself is
Mm.
about 15% water.
Yeah.
So it's about 15% lean mass. So you has a certain amount of, some people, when they lose a lot of adipose mass, they're
Mm.
going to almost inevitably lose a certain amount of lean mass. Okay, so aside from that, when you're losing body weight, the goal would be to retain as much lean body mass while you're losing fat mass. And the two ways, or the two things you want to concentrate on while you're doing that, is limiting your rate of weight loss to at most about 1% of your body weight per week. So, and that's not a set in stone, absolutely precise benchmark. It's more like a good guideline. So if you're losing more than 1% of your body weight a week, then chances are you might be putting lean body mass
Yeah.
at risk. Okay, so limit your weight loss per week to 1%, which is fast anyway. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's like, that's fast anyway.
Do you
And
think
then
do you think people who are heavier to start with, that they have a bit more room to lose a bit more because they have more body fat to start with?
I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say no. But because we're looking at percentages,
Yeah.
if somebody, for example, if we take a more extreme example of somebody being 300 pounds,
Mm,
if during that time they're losing 3 pounds a week,
mm,
that's fine. Now you take somebody who's 150 pounds.
mm.
If they're losing more than a pound and a half a week, like if like they're losing 2 pounds a week, then you might get a
Okay.
little bit worried that, okay, we might be losing a little too fast.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but yeah, I would agree with you that the heavier somebody starts off at, the initial weight losses can be more dramatic than 1% a week initially. And
Mm,
this isn't necessarily cause for alarm, but just know that that's not going to last. And you're going to be actually happy to even get 0.5% a week at a certain point.
yeah.
So yeah, that would be safeguard number one against lean mass loss, is making sure that your weekly losses are limited to roughly 1% a
Mm,
week.
mm,
And then the second safeguard against lean mass loss would be to make sure that you're getting enough dietary protein. And as we know, right in the ballpark of 1.6 grams of goal body weight or target body weight.
yeah.
Because technically, if somebody, let's say they're 100 kilos or 120, 150 kilos,
Yeah.
then basing protein on that would could essentially be over prescribing protein. So you would
Yeah.
base protein targets on the goal body weight
Yeah.
instead of the current body weight if you're looking at an individual with obesity.
Mm,
So those are the two things: rate of weight loss per week, and then protein intake. And then there's a third thing that would ensure that you're maintaining lean body mass while you're losing body weight. And that third thing is a relative preservation of your resistance training performance.
mm,
So your lifting capacity. So if there are not these precipitous drops in strength while you're losing body weight, then you can use lifting capacity. And I'm not necessarily talking about maximal 1 rep max strength. I'm talking about if you can preserve the number of reps and sets and load that you do with, you don't even have to track all your exercises. Like
mm,
one exercise per your favorite exercise per muscle group.
yeah.
Just kind of keep an eye on that. Make sure you're not losing significant amounts of strength in
Mm,
the amount of sets, reps, load that you do per session. Then that is a decent indicator that you are maintaining your lean body mass while you're losing body weight and body fat. So those would be kind of the three things that you could look at to prevent the phenomenon of
mm,
collateral fattening, where at the end of your weight loss cycle,
yeah.
you've lost a bunch of muscle and your body goes, oh, we're in an energy crisis. And therefore your appetite is way higher than it really could have been and
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really cool. That's really cool. I have a question here from a question that was posted on Instagram. The lady is saying weight loss can be difficult during a perimenopause due to hormonal changes, right? Lots going on there. What is the best way to approach weight loss during this phase while strength training 3 to 4 times a week for 45 minutes?
Okay. So during the perimenopause period, there can be distractions that stress women out. There can be physical symptoms that add a lot of psychological stress and sort of default people to kind of self-medicating with food. There can be increases in appetite. And also during the menopause transition, and beyond it, what happens is a tendency to, like, if you were to gain fat during that period, it there tends to be this shift in where you accumulate body fat. So it's a little bit more centrally shifted, or shifted towards the abdominal region. And this is because of hormonal changes that happen at
Yeah.
perimenopause and onward. So I guess my advice for anybody who's in the midst of the menopausal transition is to know that these different cravings and these different sort of feelings and symptoms are bound to happen. But if you can not use food as a sort of a stress relief type of behavior,
Mm.
then you'll be fine. There's no fat doesn't automatically come onto the body during the menopause transition. It's because appetite can go up and life stressors can be swirling around
Yeah.
simultaneously in the background, with children, with ailing parents, with with various social, financial things going on during that
Mhm.
time when people are that age, and that in that point in middle age. So the rules for maintaining good body composition, the rules for losing body fat, the rules for training, they don't change
Mm.
because you're in the menopausal transition. You just have to be aware that it's just going to be harder because of these distractions and these physical symptoms. And you also have to be aware that if you just kind of let yourself go and you're not engaged in conscious nutrition and in a training program, the
Mm.
body fat that you do gain will, in quotes, show up more on the abdominal area than they did when you were
Yeah.
pre-menopause and younger adulthood.
Yeah. From my experience, my anecdotal experience, and again, the experience of some of the women I work with, because I started this when I was 38. I hit perimenopause really, really
Mm-hmm.
quite, 38. And my nutrition hadn't changed, Alan, but my training, I couldn't recover from it at all. I was always achy. So for me, it was really about stepping back and trying to figure out what volume could my body recover from, right? Because I was someone who could do an hour cardio every single day if I wanted to. I didn't, but I had the energy to. And now
Mm-hmm.
suddenly a half an hour cardio was literally, I was flat out for a couple of days just because of the one half an hour cardio session. Everything was hurting, right? So
Mm-hmm.
apart from nutrition, even the training for me, if I did 45 minutes hardcore training right now, I'm not getting up tomorrow morning. I can tell you that much. It takes me longer to recover from a session. So I've had to reduce the volume of my workouts, the frequency of my workouts, as well as I try to adjust during this period, right? So yeah, a lot of things change, but the recovery, the sleep is the thing that's impacting us the most, because we can't sleep. You've got hot flashes, you wake up tired, you've got kids to deal with, right? So all of these things are going to influence our nutrition, our eating habits, and our training habits, and our movement habits. So you're absolutely spot on in kind of step back and look at, okay, how are you handling life at this stage, and start to figure things out from there, right?
Yeah. And it's great that you bring those specific examples, and it's great that you mention how even just differences in sleep quality can impact the program profoundly.
Yeah.
So when your sleep is impacted, your training capacity is greatly impacted.
Yeah.
And when you get less sleep and lower quality sleep, you also have increased cravings throughout the day to
Yeah.
eat, you know, foods that'll immediately fulfill your biological drive for
Yeah.
high calorie density and
Yeah.
immediate and strong food reward, which will be these hyper palatable junk foods and stuff. And
Yeah.
so yeah, if I mean, just by the menopausal transition affecting sleep,
Yeah.
it can also affect training and appetite. And so those are challenges that can't be underemphasized.
Yeah.
Now, there's some interesting research that has been done by, let me see if I can actually pull up the authors here. Okay. So this was Greendale and
Mm.
colleagues. Looking at the SWAN study. So SWAN is an acronym for Study of Women's Health Across the Nation, SWAN. And so they looked at women in their the median age, I believe, was like 51 or 52 or something like that.
Mm.
But they tracked body composition from the 8 years prior to the final menstrual period, and they tracked it about 10 years after
Mm.
the final menstrual period.
Mm.
So that like inflection point
Mm.
of the menopausal transition, they looked at body composition pre and post, almost about a decade on both sides. And so they found an acceleration of body fat gain and lean mass loss happen about 2.5 years prior to the final menstrual period. And they saw this continue about 1.5 years on average after the final menstrual period. So this acceleration in this negative recomposition, we can call
Mm.
it, and this unfavorable recomposition with an increase in fat mass and decrease in lean body mass, this actually decelerated about 2 years after the final menstrual period. So I guess maybe what can give women hope who are going through or about to go through the menopausal transition or the perimenopause period is that, at least statistically and on average, this is not a lifetime battle.
Yeah.
It subsides. The battle gets less difficult about 2 years after the final menstrual period, on average at the population level. Now, individuals differ
Yeah.
greatly. And so some people may have a longer battle, some people may have a shorter battle. But at least on average, it is a sort of this concentrated 3 to 4 year period where things are very difficult. And you can either build really bad habits during that period by self-medicating with food and or alcohol, etc., and just not training,
Yeah.
or you can just do what you can to make sure you're reinforcing good habits during that time period, and then you end up at a much better spot when the storm passes relatively.
And this is where having good habits before it even starts, so that they're part of your life, right? This is where it can really, really kind of help, because you've already built those habits, right? It's a lot harder to build new habits when life is hard. So it's easier to build habits when life is easy, so that when life gets hard, you've already got those habits in check, at least to kind of keep you going, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. You can't just gather them all up in an instant if you haven't trained those habits in.
Yeah, yeah.
And it does take months and years to really get these things down. But that's part of our job, right? Just to help people learn these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I am curious. Have you ever changed your mind about something? Say you had knowledge about something and you're very biased towards it and all of that stuff, and then you had evidence against that bias, and then you changed your mind.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah,
love.
yeah. There are a couple things that stand out.
Mm.
One of them would be me believing that plant-based protein sources were vastly inferior to animal-based protein sources, and that you needed to consume a good 30% more protein as a plant-based
Okay,
dieter compared to somebody who is an omnivore.
right.
Well, that's not necessarily true after an accumulation of research showing that there's several plant-based proteins that are just almost as anabolic as animal-based proteins, and there are a couple select types of plant-based proteins that are on par with or are potentially more anabolic than animal-based proteins, and one of them being mycoprotein, which is a fungus-based protein. It's expensive and it's kind of, cost prohibitive, and it's like I don't really know how practical that
Mm,
knowledge is to know that mycoprotein is this
yeah.
special anabolic protein. But there is also some other evidence that legume-based protein like pea protein has this one-hit wonder study where it was similar to whey protein in terms of its ability to increase muscle thickness. And I recently did a systematic review on soy protein,
Mhm.
where just in general, soy protein has just several positive physiological impacts. Um, in addition to its ability to support muscle mass and athletic performance. And so I definitely underestimated and didn't give plant proteins enough credit over the
Mm,
years. And as the evidence accumulated, I have to
yeah.
retract my position on that, to the point where nowadays I'll say if the stakes are high and you're working with like maybe a competitive athlete or somebody or even a recreational athlete with a lot on the line, then you might not need to increase their protein more than like 10-20% as let's say a vegan beyond an
Mm,
omnivore, if you want to try to put them on the same playing field with
yeah.
them. Whereas in the past, I'd go, yeah, you need at least like a third more protein to run with them. So, and a case can be made for eating the same amount of protein as
Mm,
a plant-based person, but I still wouldn't take that chance for high-level athletes where there's a lot at stake.
mm.
The other thing that I changed my mind on was the idea that we need a high meal frequency through the day, eat every 3 to 4 hours
Oh, yeah.
to keep muscle and to keep the
WC
metabolism
high.
humming along.
Yeah.
I changed my position on that after a lot of research came out showing meal frequencies from as low as 1 to 2 meals a day having the same muscle preservation capacity as like 9 to 11 meals a day. And then you have the 0 calorie alternate day fasting models preserving similar amounts of lean mass as the daily caloric restriction models in some
Mm,
populations, not all. But I had to change my position on meal frequency
mm,
as a result of those things, for especially for the general population.
yeah.
So if we're talking about certain segments of the population that we serve, like bodybuilders, recreational fitness folks, the bros, the gym bros, there's still merit to maintaining a certain amount of meal frequency in order to maximize muscular gains and things like that. But
Mm,
for the general population, the whole idea that, oh, you need to eat every 3 to 4 hours to keep the
yeah.
metabolism going and to maintain that's just not true anymore. It
Yeah.
never was true. So I had to humble myself and say, oh, well, I was wrong about that.
Yeah, but that's what being truly evidence-based is, right? Like we need to go where the science is, right?
Mm,
So we need to say, yeah, well, I was wrong, and that's okay. It's only when we get so stuck with our biases and assumptions that's when we really stop learning and stop growing and stop really, supporting people the way that they need to be supported because we're so stuck with our own identity. Oh my God, I was wrong. What does it mean for me if I admit I was wrong, right? Which is where a lot of misinformation in the nutrition space comes from, right?
yes.
But everybody wants to hold on to the beliefs that they had, beliefs that may have built their empires and businesses, and now the evidence is against that, but they can't let go.
Yeah, it's a human nature thing, Yusra. It's an
Yeah.
ego thing. And it's very difficult for people who don't have that science-minded philosophy
Mm,
that, hey, we have to follow the data if we want to call ourselves science-based.
yeah.
If you want to just like, if you want to treat fitness or nutrition or training like a religion, if you want to be the leader of your cult, of course that you can always maintain a steadfast position regardless of what the march of science demonstrates. But I would rather follow evidence on matters of nutrition and training for sure. But religion is a whole separate thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So as the last question, I know I said the last question was the last question, but this is the real last question, right? As
That's okay. If you think of something while you're asking this question, you are welcome to ask it.
thanks,
I
Alex.
love talking to you. You're
Oh
you're so
God,
good at you're so good at asking these great questions. You
we
really
can
are.
talk for hours, can't we? What
Yeah.
can we do as practitioners? Because the evidence-based space is so small compared to everything that's going on out there. You know, our community of evidence-based practitioners is so small. What can we do within our capacity to improve this field, right? To help people more. How else can we equip ourselves with the tools, let's say, and the knowledge?
Man, oh my gosh.
I know that's a tough question, right?
It's up to people like you and me to try to reach the masses. We just have to work harder and be more prolific with our work, be more I guess productive with the materials that we can build and put out there. It's a really tough question, Yusra, because we were just talking. I was just about to raise the issue that these platforms are going to start charging astronomical monthly fees for content creators. And it used to be that, hey, we had these in quotes free platforms to get the information out and to give ourselves some exposure and have a symbiotic relationship
Mm,
with Facebook, Meta, Instagram. Hey, we're busting our asses putting out the good content, and
mm,
they're already charging for that advertising and charging for this and that. Now they're going to start charging for basic reach, and really, I mean, the people who will, or the entities who will be able to take advantage of that, are the big businesses, the big companies. And then individual content creators are going to have a disadvantage once again.
yeah.
So it's super difficult. I mean, maybe if you can get on Oprah or something like that, or Dr. Oz, you can become a guest and then talk to the world about your very sound and sane and technically correct bits of wisdom and advice that you
Oh,
can give to the general public. If we can get you on there, then that would be a way to leverage these big platforms to let the right information be heard. That's always the toughest
yeah,
question, Yusra.
yeah.
I wish I had a better answer.
Because
I really do.
it's the people who are already struggling, especially women, and they are the target of all these diets, right? All the fads, all the detoxes, all the, you know, and the impact it has on mental health is huge, Alan, right? Forget the physical consequences of that, of those messages, but the mental sort of negative side effect of that is huge. It leads to emotional
Yeah.
eating, it leads to eating disorders. It's frustrating when you know the solution is not that hard, but people just need to hear it, right? But we haven't got the platforms, the algorithms are not with us. They're literally against us. They're with the
Yeah.
people who can, give you like the secret hack for the summer body that you want, right? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's very difficult. We're battling, number one, you know, people who have large platforms putting out misinformation, but we're also battling human nature itself, because people want that simple magic pill or that simple magic protocol.
Yeah.
And it's just not necessarily simple. And it's definitely not exciting when you tell people, hey, losing 1% of your body weight a week is actually fast.
Yeah.
If you could lose 0.5% of your body weight a week, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you tell people about the ins and outs of nutrition, some of the very basic stuff, eat more of this stuff, get enough protein, it's like, okay, that's not very exciting. I want you to tell me what's the
What are the
magic thing I
rules?
need to
Right.
eat?
I
Yeah.
need to hear the rules.
Give me the rules. So it's just so difficult. And our job as coaches is to, I guess, facilitate a certain degree of patience in our audiences, and to just keep modeling what they need to accomplish and what they need to maintain. And I think that over the past 10 years, the evidence-based, science-based movement in nutrition and fitness has come quite a long way.
Yeah.
And we have created a good amount of, in quotes, representatives and foot soldiers with pretty large platforms. And I do see it growing.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it can outpace people who are going into supermarkets and ranting and raving about stupid little ingredients in foods.
Yeah.
I just don't know how it can outpace those things.
And why is there always screaming and shouting? I don't get that part.
These people know how to capture people's emotions. They know how to grab an audience, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, human nature just gravitates towards that.
Yeah.
You know, you and I can be discussing the most brilliant things in the world, but we'll have this tiny little narrow niche of people who actually hear the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for having a conversation with me, Alan. Amazing as always. Okay, where can people find you and all the awesome work that you do?
AlanAragon.com. And I have to update my speaking page. I've gotten a bunch of demand for speaking now, which is cool. Now the pandemic really kind of put a monkey wrench in that for a while, but
Yeah.
I'm actually going to be out there internationally, educating the practitioners actually. So
Very cool.
it's alanaragon.com, and then my biggest platform probably is Instagram. So
Yeah.
my social media handles are the Alan Aragon,
Yeah.
and that's it. And
Okay.
yeah.
And one last question. When
Mhm.
are you upping the price for your monthly research reviews? $10 forever. It's like I'm hoping this month is gonna take it to $11 maybe.
You were so kind and so gracious, Yusra, with that. I don't know. I it's not really on the table just yet, but I truly appreciate professionals at your level telling me that they find value in a
No,
research
honestly, it's
review.
if you're a health and fitness professional or just someone who loves to geek out, who loves to understand nutrition, Alan's monthly review is like sign up for it. It's like what, $10 a month?
Yeah.
Seriously? Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
At this point in time, I've unsubscribed because with my masters and everything, I
Mhm.
I was subscribed to so many things. I've unsubscribed to all of them except that,
Mm.
right?
Oh
Except
man.
AR. I'm never going away. So keep that going, please, for the rest of us.
Thank you.
As always, a pleasure talking to you, Alan. And I'll talk to you soon.